Hello, my loves. Okay, I want to tell you something that happened to me a couple of months ago, and I'm going to tell it in the full version because it deserves the full version, and also because I think by the time we get to the end of this video, you're going to understand why I'm starting here. I walked into a door, not like a little bump, not like I grazed a door frame and caught myself. I'm tall. The doorway was not. The top of the iron frame caught me square in the head with enough force that the door shook, and I stood there in the middle of a courtyard in Córdoba, Spain, doing a very private and very focused assessment of whether I was about to lose consciousness. People actually stopped walking. One woman turned around to see if my eyes were still in my head, I guess. I was fine. My head was not happy with me. The door was completely unbothered. And I've been thinking about that moment ever since because something about it keeps pulling at me. And when something keeps pulling at me, I've learned to follow that instead of dismiss it. So that's where we're going to start today. A door, my head, a woman who thought she was going through something and discovered she wasn't paying attention to what was directly in front of her. Stay with me. I promise this is going somewhere. Let me tell you who I am before I go any further, because it matters to the door story in a way I'll explain. I am Tammy Mitchell. I am an identity realignment advisor. I specifically work with high-functioning, high-performing women who have built impressive lives, and somewhere inside those impressive lives have lost themselves or a part of themselves. These are women who are approaching retirement or menopause or some other threshold, and they're realizing that the structure they've been living inside has stopped fitting the woman living inside it. I know this terrain because I've walked every inch of it, not theoretically or not through a client's experience, but my own experience. I had 19 homes at one point simultaneously. I was a millionaire. I had built something real and substantial, and by every external measure, I had figured something out. And then I lost it. Not gradually, but definitively. It was the kind of collapse that doesn't leave you with a graceful landing. I went from that to living in a rental home where I still ended up almost a week away from living out of my car with my kid. That was a while ago, and I've lived in beautiful homes since then. Most recently, we lived in a motorhome for a year and a half doing travel healthcare work across the American Southeast. I've slept in parking lots and sketchy campgrounds. I've made meals in a space that was a fraction of any room I'd ever owned. I had it all, and I had nothing that looked like the life I had built. But what I did have was clarity. It was the specific kind of clarity that you can only get when the performance finally has nowhere left to go. I also have 31 years of sobriety. Not 31 years of white-knuckling it or performing recovery in a room full of folding chairs, but 31 years of choosing myself daily before I even had language for what that meant, before I knew the word identity, and before I understood that what I was doing every single day was the most fundamental kind of self-excavation. And then I moved to Spain at 57. We didn't move because everything was in order or because the timing was right. We moved because we stopped waiting for the timing to be right, and we started treating our lives as something that was already happening, whether we showed up for it or not. I came with 6 suitcases and left 8 behind in a storage unit in the United States. Those 8 suitcases included every piece of winter clothing I owned, which I discovered when the Andalusian winter arrived and I had nothing warm. I had to buy a new wardrobe, which was in itself an adventure. Spanish women are small. I am not. I literally bought my initial winter clothing at the Spanish equivalent of a super Walmart from the men's section. Clearly, efficiency matters to me much more than aesthetics. And I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand who walked into that door. I'm not a woman who lacks confidence. I'm not a woman who is unfamiliar with hard things. I am a woman who has done the actual work of excavating herself from rubble, who moved countries, who holds the kind of credibility that comes from having lived both addresses and knowing what each one feels like in your body. And I walked straight into an iron door because I was moving fast and I wasn't paying attention to what was directly in front of me. I want to talk about something that I think gets confused constantly in the space I work in and in the culture broadly. And I want to talk about it because I think it's keeping a lot of women stuck in a way nobody is naming clearly. Confidence and attention are not the same thing. We talk about confidence like it's the answer to everything. If you just believe in yourself enough and trust yourself enough, or if you've done enough work on yourself, you will move through your life with some sort of frictionless ease. Things will open for you. Doors will part. Well, I'm here to tell you that I have the receipts on that. I walked into that door in Córdoba because I had full confidence that I was going through it. My head tells a different story. Here's what actually happened. I had registered that the door was there. I had technically seen it. I needed to step down into the courtyard, so that's what I was focused on. What I had not done was stop moving long enough to assess it accurately. I assumed, based on my pace and my momentum, that I would pass through it the way I expected. But I was wrong. The door had its own opinion, and it shared it with my skull. I watch women do this in their lives constantly, not because they lack confidence, but because they've been moving so fast, carrying so much, managing so many things, that they've developed this incredible capacity to register what's in front of them without actually seeing it. And at some point, something stops them cold. It's typically not a failure or a breakdown necessarily. Could be a door. It's usually a threshold they assumed would open the way things have always opened, and it doesn't, because the rules of this particular passage are different from every passage they've navigated before. Retirement is a door like this. So is menopause. That moment when your children stop needing you in the way they used to, the moment when you look at your marriage and realize you are both completely different people than the ones who started it. The moment when your career ends or shifts and you discover that you built your entire identity inside it without meaning to. None of these are failures of confidence. They're failures of attention. And attention is something you can choose to return to right now, if someone will just name what you're actually walking toward. I want to tell you specifically about the women I recognize, because I think some of you are going to recognize yourselves here. And I want you to recognize yourselves intentionally, not accidentally. These are women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. They're not women who fell apart. They're women who held everything together, often magnificently, for so long that holding everything together became the whole of their identity. They're reliable. They're capable. They're the person everyone calls. They've built careers and families and communities. They show up figure it out, and they never ask for help in a way that creates burden. And underneath all of that, they are exhausted in a way that is not about sleep. One of the questions I sit with women inside is this: how long have you been the strong one? Not because you chose it, because someone had to be. And I ask them just to give me a number. I'm not looking for a story or an explanation, just how many years. The numbers that I get back. I want you to sit with this for a second. 20 years. 30 years. My entire adult life. Since I was 12, since my mom got sick, since my dad left, since I had my first child, since I realized nobody else was going to do it. And then I ask, well, who takes care of you? Not in the sense of who does practical things for you, but in the sense of who holds the weight when it gets heavy. Who are you allowed to be not fine with? Who sees the real version of you? And most of them go quiet. They don't project that nobody loves them. They know they're loved. But there's a version of being loved that does not include being actually seen. There's a version of being in community where you're the one who holds the space and no one has ever thought to offer you the same. Others don't do this because they're cruel. They do it because you're so good at not needing it that they've accepted that as true. These women aren't broken. They're structurally misaligned. The container that got them here is not the container that will get them to what comes next. And nobody told them this was going to happen. Nobody prepared them for the moment when everything they've built stops fitting. I want to talk about something called the Carrying Audit. And I want to explain it here because I think even the concept of it, just the name, does something useful. Most exhausted women are not tired from what they're doing. They're tired from what they're holding. And those are not the same thing. Doing is action. Holding is structural. Doing has a beginning and an end, and holding just accumulates. Think about all the things you're currently holding that have nothing to do with your schedule today. Maybe it's the worry about your adult child who's making choices you don't understand. Maybe it's the low-grade anxiety about whether you said something wrong to someone last week. The grief you sat down and stepped over because there just wasn't time to sit with it. The obligation to call your mother that you've been sitting in the back of your head for 10 days. The membership you're still paying for because canceling it would mean admitting something you're not ready to admit. The version of yourself from 15 years ago that you keep apologizing for internally even though nobody else is still thinking about it. None of that is on your calendar. All of it is on your body. The Carrying Audit is the practice of learning to tell the difference between what is genuinely yours to carry and what you simply got good at holding because you got good at holding it and nobody ever asked you to put it down. This is harder than it sounds because a lot of what women carry has been held so long it's stopped feeling like a choice. It just feels like the weight of being alive. And that's not weight you chose. That's accumulated obligation that's been rebranded as personality. I think the thing that surprises women almost every time is not the heavy things. They already know about the heavy things. They've named those. What surprises them is discovering how much of what they've been carrying was optional. Things they picked up so long ago in moments of crisis or love or necessity, and then just kept carrying because they forgot to put them down. Setting down something you've been holding for 20 years does not feel like relief immediately, even though it seems like it would. It feels disorienting. It feels like something's missing. Your body has organized itself around that weight. And when you remove it, there's a vacancy where it used to be, and the mind, which loves a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar ease, will try to pick the thing back up. Part of the process is learning to tolerate the vacancy, learning to recognize the disorientation of lightness and not interpret it as loss. I walked into that door because I was carrying momentum without attention. I was moving fast, holding my pace, trusting my direction, and not slowing down long enough to see what the passage actually required. The carrying audit is what slowing down looks like in practice. It isn't stopping or retreating. It's simply just putting down enough that you can see clearly what's directly in front of you. I want to name something else because it's something most women won't say out loud, and clearly I'm someone who will say what most women won't say out loud. So here we go. There is the woman that everyone sees, and there's the woman underneath her. The distance between those two women is called the performance gap. And I want to be clear that this is not the same as hypocrisy. The woman everyone sees is real. She's capable and present, and she shows up. She's not a lie. But she is a performance in the truest sense of the word, meaning she's a version of yourself that's been curated, consciously or not, for an audience. That audience is everyone who's ever needed something from you, which is most of the people in your life, which means the performance has been running for a very long time. The woman underneath isn't dramatic. She's not some repressed, explosive version of yourself that's going to ruin your life if you let her out. She's quieter than that. She is the part of you that has preferences you stopped consulting. She's the part that notices things before you have time to manage them. She's the part that is tired in a way you can't explain to anyone because it's not about the work. It's about the weight of the performance itself. Closing this gap is not about dismantling your life. I think women hear you've been performing and they get scared that the implication is that everything they've built is false. And that's just not true. It isn't false. The life is real and the love is real. The work is real. What's not real is the gap between who you actually are and who you've been presenting. That gap costs you something every single day, much like the way that low-grade expenses drain an account, slowly and consistently, in a way that really doesn't feel like a crisis until you go to check the balance. The women that I recognize are not in crisis usually. They are in that specific uncomfortable place where their life is fine on paper and profoundly unsatisfying in ways in practice. They have a good life. They can't explain why it feels like something is off or something is missing. They've been faking fine for so long, they're not sure they know what real okay feels like. This is not a mental health crisis. It's a structural gap. And structural gaps don't get fixed by therapy alone, or by a better morning routine, or by another book. They get fixed by excavation, by going down to the original architecture and asking, does this still fit? Did it ever really fit? What was I building toward? And am I still building toward that? Or has the destination changed without my permission? Here's something that I believe. Women have been marinating in manufactured shame for so long that most of them can't tell the difference between a genuine value and an obligation they absorbed from someone else's fear. Shame is extraordinarily effective as a control mechanism. It's not the dramatic, visible kind of shame. It's the quiet kind. The kind that lives in the sentence you say to yourself before you say what you actually want. It's the kind that makes you qualify every need before you voice it. It's the kind that makes you feel guilty for wanting to rest or wanting to be taken care of, or wanting something for yourself that has no practical justification. We don't allow shame in our house. This is not a policy I adopted from a framework. It's how I move through the world. The moment that someone starts speaking badly about themselves in my presence, I stop it, kindly and firmly, and my wife will attest to this. Because I've watched what manufactured shame does to women over the course of a life, and I'm just not going to participate in it. What I see in almost every woman who lands in my orbit is a permission problem. There's no confidence problem. There's no discipline problem. It's absolutely a permission problem. It's like they're waiting for someone to tell them it's okay. It's okay to want something different, or to rest without earning it first, or to take up space in their own life without justifying that space to everyone who has an opinion about it. And here's the reality, which I will say clearly, because I think it needs to be said clearly. Nobody on your current timeline is qualified to grant that permission. Not your partner, not your children, not your mother, not your friends who are comfortable with the version of you they've always known, not the algorithm, not the coach with the big following who's never sat inside a life like yours. Nobody. The permission comes from you. The work is figuring out how to grant it to yourself after a lifetime of outsourcing it. And that's not a small thing. I'm not going to pretend it's a small thing. It is the work, and it is the most important work that I know. I need to talk about the shelf here. Most of the women I know in this season of life have a shelf, possibly several shelves, full of books that were deeply felt, extensively highlighted, and have not changed a single thing about their actual life. They also have podcast hours, hundreds of them. They are extraordinarily well informed about their own transformation. They just haven't had it yet. Information is necessary and not sufficient. Understanding your patterns is not the same as changing the woman inside the patterns. You can have a complete intellectual map of every wound you carry, every behavior it produced, every way it shaped your choices, and still be standing in the same spot wondering why nothing has shifted. That's because insight is not identity work. Insight is the prerequisite to identity work. The actual work is different. I also see women who have been in therapy for years, good therapy, real therapy. They've processed the childhood. They understand the attachment patterns. They've named the wounds with precision, and they're still standing in the same spot. Therapy is one of the most valuable tools available to you, and it's not identity work. It's the map. And at some point, you actually have to start the journey. I also see women who've hired every kind of coach. Every one of them has given her a framework, a lens, a language, a system. What none of them has given her is a mirror. Their framework rich and identity poor. And that is the specific condition I recognize. You have every tool and no reflection. And without the reflection, the tools stay on the shelf next to the books. I'd like to tell you about a realignment lens, which is the framework of everything I've done. And I'm using the word framework knowing I just spent several minutes talking about the problem with frameworks. So let me clarify the distinction. A framework is a problem when it replaces self-knowledge. It's useful when it enables it. A realignment lens is not a personality test. It's not a system who tells you who you are. It's a way of seeing what is actually happening so you can stop blaming yourself for a structural problem. Here's the core premise. Your life isn't broken. Your container is. There's a predictable moment in the lives of high-functioning, high-performing women when the structure that got them here stops fitting the woman living inside it. The career that was right at 35 is suffocating at 55. The marriage that worked when everyone was in survival mode stops working when survival mode ends and you discover you don't actually know each other outside of it. The identity built on being needed stops being sustainable the moment people stop needing you in the same way. This isn't a personal failure, it's structural misalignment. The container stopped fitting. That is a container problem, not a character problem. The reason this distinction matters enormously is that when you think you're broken, you try to fix yourself. You go to therapy, you read more books, you hire another coach, you add better habits. You try to make yourself fit a container that was never going to hold you at this stage. And when you understand that the container stopped fitting, the question changes. You stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what actually needs to shift. And those are completely different questions. They lead to completely different work. The lens is the tool that helps women see their situation clearly enough to ask the right question. Once you can see it accurately, once you can name the structural misalignment instead of carrying it as personal failure, something in you relaxes enough to do the actual work. I want to come back to Spain here for a minute because I think there's something that's relevant to everything I've been talking about. I moved here not knowing the language. I've been learning Spanish with enormous confidence and a very limited certainty. Somewhere here in Almuñécar, there are people who have heard me agree to things I'll never know about. I've nodded and said sí to offers I cannot identify. I'm operating in a world where I cannot rely on the thing I'm usually most confident about, which is my ability to communicate precisely. It is so humbling, and it is also clarifying. I rise before the sun here. The dark and the quiet before the stars, before the world gets loud, is my church. That hour before everything starts is where I actually live. And Spain has given me more of that than I've had in years because I didn't bring my former life here. I brought what mattered. 6 suitcases with me, 8 left behind, my wife and our pets. What I'm finding here in this country that has been humbling me with iron doors and incomprehensible agreements and an entirely different pace than the one I operated at for most of my life is that I'd been moving too fast to pay attention to myself for a long time. I knew things. I had done the work. I had the sobriety and the excavation and the rebuilt life. And I was still moving at the pace of the life I was trying to leave rather than the pace of the life I was trying to build. Spain forced me to slow down. It didn't do this because it's a slow country. I was forced to slow down because Spain refuses to operate on American urgency. The doors here are heavy and low because the buildings are old. The pace here is human because the culture decided a long time ago that some things were worth protecting. The olive trees in Andalusia are hundreds of years old, and they were not rushed into being what they are. I'm not suggesting that you move to Spain, although, if you want to talk about that, I do have some specific feelings about it. I am suggesting that the pace you're moving at right now may be the pace of a life you're no longer living. And the door is going to keep finding your head until you slow down enough to see what you're actually walking into. I want to tell you about what I've watched happen when a woman actually does this work. I want to describe it because I think a lot of women have been told what transformation looks like from a distance, and what it looks like up close is completely different. From a distance, it looks like confidence. It looks like a woman who got her life together. It looks like a rebrand or a glow up or whatever the current language is for a woman who changed. But up close, it looks like a woman who stopped lying to herself in small ways. It looks like a woman who used to say yes when she meant no, and has started letting herself pause long enough to find out what she actually means. Not every time, and maybe not dramatically, but just a little more than before, just enough that she can feel the difference. It looks like a woman who notices when she's performing and can name it as performance, instead of experiencing it as identity. That's not a small thing. That's the distance between the woman everyone sees and the woman underneath her beginning to close. It looks like a woman who stopped apologizing for taking up space before anyone asked her to. It looks like a woman who had a shelf full of books she hadn't acted on, and who finally put the next book down and asked a different question. That question isn't, what do I need to learn? It's, what do I already know that I've been refusing to act on? I apologize for the noise. That question, by the way, is one of the most productive and most frightening questions a woman can ask herself. Because the answer is almost always already there. She knew. She has known. What she needed was not more information. What she needed was someone who refused to let her lie about it in their presence. I've watched women come into this exhausted and leave it still tired because the world is still demanding and they're still navigating it. But the quality of the tired is different. It's the tired of actually living rather than the tired of performing. And those two things feel completely different in your body. I've watched women have conversations with their partners that they've been avoiding for years. Not because they suddenly became unafraid, because they became more afraid of staying silent than what the conversation might surface. I've watched women waiting for retirement stop and begin living like their time belongs to them. I've watched a woman decide in the middle of this to leave a family relationship she considered very important to her, not dramatically or impulsively, but with full knowledge of what she was doing and why. I watched her leave something that had stopped fitting, and I watched her face in that moment, and it looked like someone who had finally put down something she'd been carrying for so long she forgot it was a choice. That's what it looks like up close. That's what transformation is up close. It's not a new version of yourself. It's the original version. The one that was always there, the one that got buried underneath everything that needed to be built and held and managed and performed. She was never gone. She was just waiting for someone to stop asking if she was fine. I want to come back to the door one more time. Here's what I did after I walked into it. I stood there for a moment. I confirmed that my head was still on my shoulders. I actually looked at the door, and I saw that it was low and that I needed to duck and that the information was available to me the whole time. I just hadn't stopped long enough to use it. And then I went through it correctly, intentionally, with my head down. And that's the move. It's not about avoiding the threshold. It's not about going back. It's not about standing in front of it indefinitely waiting for it to change. It's about stopping long enough to see what the passage actually requires and then going through. I know women who have been standing in front of their version of this door for years. They can see it. They know it's there. They are not confused about the fact that something has to change. They're stuck in the specific gap between knowing and moving, between understanding the situation and taking the step that changes it. And what I know from my own life and from this work is that the gap is almost never about courage. It's almost always about one of two things. Either they don't actually know what the step is yet, or they know exactly what the step is, and they're terrified of what they'll lose if they take it. Which is also something to acknowledge, because the fear of loss is legitimate, and it deserves a direct conversation rather than a motivational platitude. Okay, I've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to land this cleanly. We started with the door. We talked about confidence versus attention. We talked about the carrying audit and what it means to put down what was never yours to hold. We talked about the performance gap and the woman underneath the one everyone counts on. We talked about manufactured shame and the permission problem, and why nobody on your current timeline is qualified to grant you the permission you're waiting for. And we talked about what it actually looks like when a woman stops performing and starts living. If any of this landed somewhere real for you, I want to hear about it. Hit the comments and tell me which part hit. Tell me what you're currently carrying that you've been carrying so long it stopped feeling like a choice. Tell me what your door is. If you know a woman who needs to hear this, send her the video. Send her the whole thing, not just a clip. This is real. Subscribe and stay. I show up here consistently, and I'll keep saying the things that need to be said. Stay steady, my loves. We just aren't done here yet.